With the conscientious precision of a railroad man, in the moment when the hand of the clock ended the half-hour, he signed his name to the order instructing the Comet to proceed with engine number 306, and transmitted the order to Winston Station. The station agent at Winston shuddered when he looked at the order, but he was not the man to defy authority. He told himself that the tunnel was not perhaps as dangerous as he thought. He told himself that the best policy these days was not to think. When he handed their copies of the order to the conductor and the engineer of the Comet, the conductor glanced slowly about the room from face to face, folded the slip of paper, put it into his pocket, and walked out without a word. The engineer stood looking at the paper for a moment, then threw it down and said, "I'm not going to do it. And if it's come to where this railroad hands out orders like this one, I'm not going to work for it either. Just list me as having quit." "But you can't quit," cried the station agent. "They'll arrest you for it." "If they find me," said the engineer, and walked out of the station into the vast darkness of the mountain night. The engineer from Silver Springs, who had brought in number 306, was sitting in a corner of the room. He chuckled and said, "He's yellow." The station agent turned to him. "Will you do it, Joe? Will you take the Comet?" Joe Scott was drunk. There had been a time when a railroad man reporting for duty with any sign of intoxication would have been regarded as a doctor arriving for work with sores of smallpox on his face. But Joe Scott was a privileged person. 3 months ago he had been fired for an infraction of safety rules, which had caused a major wreck. 2 weeks ago he had been reinstated in his job by order of the Unification Board. He was a friend of Fred Kinnan. He protected Kinnan's interests in his union, not against the employers, but against the membership. "Sure," said Joe Scott. "I'll take the Comet. I'll get her through if I go fast enough." The fireman of number 306 had remained in the cab of his engine. He looked up uneasily when they came to switch his engine to the head end of the Comet. He looked up at the red and green lights of the tunnel, hanging in the distance above 20 miles of curves. But he was a placid, amiable fellow, who made a good fireman, with no hope of ever rising to engineer. His husky muscles were his only asset. He felt certain that his superiors knew what they were doing, so he did not venture any questions. The conductor stood by the rear end of the Comet. He looked at the lights of the tunnel, then at the long chain of the Comet's windows. A few windows were lighted, but most of them showed only the feeble blue glow of night lamps edging the lowered blinds. He thought that he should rouse the passengers and warn them. There had been a time when he had placed the safety of the passengers above his own, not by reason of love for his fellow men, but because that responsibility was part of his job, which he accepted and felt pride in fulfilling. Now he felt a contemptuous indifference and no desire to save them. They had asked for and accepted Directive 10-289, he thought. They went on living, and daily turning away in evasion from the kind of verdicts that the Unification Board was passing on defenseless victims. Why shouldn't he now turn away from them? If he saved their lives, not one of them would come forward to defend him when the Unification Board would convict him for disobeying orders, for creating a panic, for delaying Mr. Chalmers. He had no desire to be a martyr for the sake of allowing people safely to indulge in their own irresponsible evil. When the moment came, he raised his lantern and signaled the engineer to start. "See," said Kip Chalmers triumphantly to Lester Tuck, as the wheels under their feet shuddered forward. "Fear is the only practical means to deal with people." The conductor stepped onto the vestibule of the last car. No one saw him as he went down the steps of the other side, slipped off the train, and vanished into the darkness of the mountains. A switchman stood ready to throw the switch that would send the Comet from the siding onto the main track. He looked at the Comet as it came slowly toward him. It was only a blazing white globe with a beam stretching high above his head and a jerky thunder trembling through the rail under his feet. He knew that the switch should not be thrown. He thought of the night 10 years ago, when he had risked his life in a flood to save a train from a washout. But he knew that times had changed. In the moment when he threw the switch and saw the headlight jerk sidewise, he knew that he would now hate his job for the rest of his life. The Comet uncoiled from the siding into a thin, straight line, and went on into the mountains with the beam of the headlight like an extended arm pointing the way, and the lighted glass curve of the observation lounge ending it off. Some of the passengers aboard the Comet were awake. As the train started its coiling ascent, they saw the small cluster of Winston's lights at the bottom of the darkness beyond their windows. Then the same darkness, but with red and green lights by the hole of a tunnel on the upper edge of the window panes. The lights of Winston kept growing smaller each time they appeared. The black hole of the tunnel kept growing larger. A black veil went streaking past the windows at times, dimming the lights. It was the heavy smoke from the coal-burning engine. As the tunnel came closer, they saw at the edge of the sky, far to the south, in a void of space and rock, a spot of living fire twisting in the wind. They did not know what it was, and did not care to learn. It is said that catastrophes are a matter of pure chance, and there were those who would have said that the